Who is the jury going to be on your self-defense case? This is something that really I think a lot of people miss in the process. And if you're like me, I like to go to the end and I then like to reverse calculate so that I can make decisions with the end in mind. My name is Tom Grieve. I'm a former state prosecutor, criminal defense attorney. And today we're going to be talking about jury selection, who the prosecutor and defense want on a defensive gun case jury, as well as how do they get there and what is the jury really allowed to see. Guys, today's the jury video. Let's get into this. If you haven't already, please take a moment to show your support for the Second Amendment. Click like and of course, subscribe to see more great content coming out. It helps the channel to grow. So this is a topic that is so important to me as a trial attorney because I understand that really every single case you're operating through the lens of how is this going to look at a jury? How is this going to look at a trial? And then we need to reverse calculate because that's going to be giving us our odds. And really for you down the lens, you're the one that's going to wind up making a lot of the fact pattern. What am I talking about by fact pattern? You're the person who's going to be deciding how many shots and all that other kind of stuff needs to happen, which hopefully is going to be predicated on strong education and training, topics of other videos. But the bottom line here is, okay, so you've got your education, you've got your training, and I don't understand why in the firearm world, we don't talk more about juries because really everything is going to be predicated on that. Here's what the end looks like. So let's start with the answer and work backwards and talk about it. At the end of the day, jury selection is so important, but it is clear as mud. What are the sides looking for and how do we get there? Seems like a natural starting spot. So who's the juror that the prosecution wants? So you've been involved in a self-defense shoot, you've been charged, you probably disagree with being charged, and you believe that you're innocent, and obviously the prosecutor views it differently. You're at your morning of your trial, day one, jury selection. Here's who the prosecutor wants to be looking for. They're looking for folks who don't own guns. They don't shoot guns. They don't hunt. And if they're not, in my experience, necessarily anti-self-defense, they're going to be basically kind of towing that line of somewhere between ambivalent, don't really care about it, don't really think about it, don't know anything about it, and I'm sort of anti. The reason why, of course, this is scary, if you're not scared already, is the fact that these individuals, once you've taken out all the so-called gun people, right? These are now folks who are left over who know nothing. And they can be swayed by, in my view, BS arguments about what's going to be important and what's not going to be important about the case. A couple examples. Well, boy, the defendant, he was carrying hollow point ammunition. That's cop killer ammunition. Or maybe, as we've seen elsewhere in certain trials, oh, the defendant, he was carrying full metal jacket ammunition. That's military grade ammunition. Obviously, if they think that there's some sort of Call of Duty warrior and they're going to be out there to harm people and take lives and so forth. Or, haven't seen this one yet, but I'm sure it's going to happen eventually. I'm sure it's already happened somewhere. You know, this guy who's carrying a high capacity magazine? What kind of crazy person does that? Not my words, guys. I'm putting myself in the role of the prosecutor. So you can see the kind of arguments that they're going to make. And if you're a firearm person, you know that those are crazy arguments. They fundamentally have nothing to do with whether or not you were in reasonable fear of imminent death or great bodily harm, and therefore were privileged to use deadly force. However, it is a distracting argument that I assure you may score points with your jury. And that's going to be the reason why a prosecutor wants folks who don't know the difference between hollow point, full metal jacket, and all that kind of stuff, because they want to be able to blow this up like it's a big deal, even though it is not a big deal at the end of the day, right? So something to keep in mind is they're going to be opening up jurors for distracting arguments that really subtract from the heart of the case. Keep in mind, a couple quick points about juries because I know a lot of people don't know this. Juries are going to be composed of 12 people. That doesn't mean that only 12 people may be sworn in and impaneled on your case, but when push comes to shove at the end of your case, it's going to be a jury of 12 people. Any verdict that they reach must be unanimous. In other words, it's got to be 12-0 one way or the other. Anything shy of that, 11-1, 10-2, and so forth, you are at risk of having a hung jury, which I assure you, your judge will do everything possible to avoid by basically sending them back, and sending them back, all right? Where do jurors come from? How do they get sworn in? How do they show up at court? Well, they're gonna get something in the mail that basically is a jury summons. It's gonna tell them, look, on this particular date, at this particular time, show up to this particular room in that particular building at this address. And generally speaking, subject to jurisdiction, you're going to see this list of names, this roster developed either from a Department of Transportation role of folks with licenses that live within the particular jurisdiction or area that we're talking about, or possibly registered voters. Again, check your local listing. But keep in mind, we've now deselected for people where if you're in a state which operates off DOT driver's licenses, then people in your community who do not have a driver's license are not going to be even eligible, sort of, for jury service because they may never be on that list of potential pool of jurors. So I'm not here to editorialize that one way or the other. I'm just here to make you aware of it right now. Keep in mind that obviously a jury is going to vary wildly from one county to the next. You can imagine that a jury from a very urban area is maybe going to think and perceive crime very differently than one in a rural area versus a suburban area. There's going to be pros and cons, strengths and weaknesses for all of you, depending upon where you are. Some of them, as a result, in certain places may be much more receptive and may give more weight to what the prosecutor and what the cops say. Other times, they may be a little bit more skeptical about that. And that could be good or bad for you, depending upon the type of case, the fact pattern, I'm going to throw a big word at you, the theory of defense that your counsel is running. Theory of the defense basically being, what's our narrative, what's our strategy? I don't want to say what are we selling, because rest assured, the prosecutor has their theory of the case too. Both sides have it if they're doing things properly. But at the end of the day, here's what we're trying to show, here's the narrative, and here's how it all needs to hang together. Juries vary by county, but they're also going to vary by times of the year as well. So if you imagine college students and all those folks coming back into town during summer, maybe they still have their either registered to vote or their driver's license still says their parents' address. So your summertime juries may actually be a little bit different in certain areas versus your winter juries. Is that relevant to your case? Topic of another video. Let me know, by the way, if you have any comments or questions on any of these sorts of things in the comment section below as we work through. Being a juror is not the path to riches, at least not for most people shy of book deals on high-profile cases. Generally speaking, they are minimally compensated, somewhere to the tune of $10 to $50 per day, give or take sub sandwiches or something like that as well, which is really left to the discretion of the court. I realize in certain places it may be a little bit more, in certain places it may be a little bit less, but there you go. Keep in mind, obviously, if you have an occupation, if you have a job where you're working and you're being paid without any kind of sick days, leave, or vacation, or paid time off or something like that, you're obviously gonna be losing a lot of money to be on that jury pool as compared to someone who maybe is salaried. And while it may not be their dream to be on the jury, it may not be such a hit where they're no longer to be able to make rent or mortgage that month. Again, all things that shape your jury pool. Unlike what you've seen in many movies, juries are almost never sequestered, meaning they're not pent up in a hotel room watching cheap, HBO reruns or something like that. They go home to their families and they're ordered to not talk about or research the case at all. But again, that's a big misconception that I deal with time and time again. They're not sequestered like what you see in many movies. And also, here's a couple other things that I don't think you probably know about. Something that goes down prior to the juries and throughout the case really is you're talking about what's called motions in limine. Motions in limine. A motion in limine can mean many different things, but fundamentally, you're setting the rule book for how the trial is to proceed. What evidence is allowed to come in? What evidence is allowed to come out? How does this particular door open to suddenly let this evidence in? Things like that. But did you know that one of the things that you talk about in a motion in limine is the fact of, are jurors allowed to even take notes during their case? That's right. Jurors may not even be allowed to take notes on your case. So if they are allowed to take notes, they'll usually be given a legal pad, a pen, pencil, however it may work. But otherwise, they may not even be allowed. They may have to remember everything. Subtle little nuances you probably didn't know about. And on that same note, are they allowed to even see all the exhibits and evidence? Just because an exhibit's been introduced at trial, a picture, let's say, doesn't mean that it has been published to the jury, which is a fancy way of saying, is the jury allowed to see this, judge? And even if it is published to the jury, that doesn't mean the jury is allowed to see it unlimited times or as much as they want. Let's take a video as an example. Even if there's a video of the entire self-defense firearm use that has been accepted as evidence, it's been published to the jury, so you've seen it in court, and the court has received it, it's now part of the case, that doesn't mean that when they're deliberating that they get unlimited views of it. Maybe the prosecutor or the defense attorney says, look, I want this particular angle to give them access to, and they're going to be allowed to see it once or twice or 3 times, whatever the case may be, because they don't want to necessarily overshadow the other evidence in the testimony that they've heard. Again, I'm giving you the arguments. I'm not saying that this is what I necessarily believe. I'm just saying these are the arguments and the framework of what might be going on behind the scenes. So there's so much more I could go into on this, but I really want to make this video primarily about jury selection, so here we go. So jury selection. We already talked about where jurors came from, some sort of DOT or voter registration roll. What happens in most trials, and likely including your defensive gun use, is you probably don't know who those people are until morning of, maybe the afternoon before. And keep in mind, you have the whole roster of folks that may be in your pool, not necessarily the ones that the clerk is going to wind up calling up in order to go through voir dire, which is the fancy way of saying the questions that both attorneys put to them. So you're going to have the larger pool of the jurors, which will then turn into the section that's actually going to be facing the voir dire questions from both sides, so the prospective people out of the larger pool who may actually make it to the jury. As folks get eliminated from that pool, more folks from the back of the room may be called forward to replace them, and then you'll kind of go through the same questions, kind of catch them up. So the prosecution, since they have the burden in the case, because after all, you are still presumed innocent until proven guilty, the prosecution, since they have the burden, they get to go first, which is considered an advantage. You want to be able to go first and last. And actually, in civil law, this is so important that sometimes the sides will basically play games with filing countersuits and all that kind of stuff because they want the burden. They want to be the first people to address the jury. They want to be the last people to address the jury. Criminal law, we don't really get that, at least not on the defense side. The prosecution always gets to go first. So they can generally, as a heads up, only call on people who raise their hand. And this is going to become important because it can sometimes turn into a game. And again, check your local listings. Maybe this isn't in every state, but it's in every state that I'm familiar with, that they're going to be asking all sorts of questions. And sometimes, there's an old saying that the quiet juror gets on the pool. So they really want to figure out what are people, where are they at, what's in their head, what's going on, how receptive are they going to be to my theory of the case, to the narrative of what I'm selling, and to the narrative of how I see these facts fitting together. So to do that, you can kind of do this in one or two different ways. You can either try to select the jurors that you want, or the more modern theory is jury deselection. In other words, I'm really trying to eliminate the people that I don't want. All right, here's the difference between them. If I'm trying to select jurors, I'm talking to people and I'm trying to figure out, oh, okay, I like this person. And I'm going to then try to eliminate any biases or anything like that so that if I'm the prosecutor, the defense attorney now can't get this person kicked off. Deselection works differently. Deselection is obviously the flip side of that coin. In other words, I'm talking to people and I find out some things that I really don't like, and I'm trying to find kind of the landmines on the jury pool, the people who I'm not going to click with them, they're not going to like my facts, just whatever the case may be, I do not want these people on my jury. That's jury deselection. So to understand how you get people off the jury, there's two different ways of doing that. One is what we call a peremptory strike or a peremptory challenge, depending upon the words and what they call it in your particular jurisdiction. A peremptory strike is basically at the end of voir dire, typically the judge will be giving jury instructions and kind of welcoming them in and explaining how the case works. There's oftentimes a clipboard passed between the sides. And both sides, depending upon the size of the jury pool, may have 4 or however many strikes, and they can just strike people off the list of, I don't like this person. You can do this with almost any exception. There are some protections that I'm not going to go into right now when it comes to anti-discrimination issues. So for instance, if you have a minority defendant and the prosecutor all of a sudden has struck all the minorities from the jury pool, leaving an all-white jury, that can create issues which may result in basically a redo on that voir dire panel, and the judge may be able to go into that. But for the most part, you can basically strike virtually anybody for almost any reason at all. Both sides, and again, you alternate back and forth on that. So that's a peremptory strike. There's also strikes for cause, which are unlimited, and this actually happens as the voir dire, so as the question answers are going on with the parties. A strike for cause is basically pretty simple. There's kind of, operatively speaking, just focusing on how this really works, not all the academic issues, there's 2 reasons why typically someone is struck for cause. One is just because they cannot serve on the jury for any particular reason. So maybe you're looking at a 3-week jury trial, which is very unusual, by the way, but maybe you are looking at a 3-week jury trial and you have a mom who's pregnant and is scheduled to give birth tomorrow. That person's gonna be struck for cause. Maybe you have someone who's got some sort of major surgery planned or some sort of major life event or something like that that's going to make them unfit for service on that jury. So that's going to be one reason for striking someone for cause. The second reason for striking someone for cause, and generally the more common one that you see, is basically someone has certain bias, certain baggage that they're bringing into the courtroom that are going to make them unfit and unable to be neutral and fair towards both sides of the argument. So as an example, if you get somebody who is just super anti-self-defense, they are a pacifist, they believe that, hey, if someone's about to shoot you, you should just let them shoot you. That's someone who, hopefully, both sides being fair, would strike for cause in a self-defense case, because that person is not going to have the capacity to give a fair shake to what the defense is selling. So that person being on the jury would create an unfair trial for the defense. And the judge is going to be giving those folks instructions, by the way, on how they are to decide the case, something called jury instructions, topic for another video. And they're going to be asking those folks whether or not, look, the judge is going to be instructing you in the law, but what you're saying is that you cannot set aside your sympathies, your prejudices, your biases, whatever the case may be. In other words, you're not going to be able to listen to what the judge says. At the end of the day, you're going to decide this based off, in no small part, potentially what you brought into this courtroom, okay? That's going to be the strike for cause. That's going to be the challenge for cause that you see going on. And initially, the prosecutor is going to start to do this. Let's get into this now. Initially, the prosecutor is going to be doing this by asking questions like, who here owns firearms? Who here knows something about maybe self-defense laws, or they took a class, or they're a member of a gun club, or they go to the range, or they hunt? In my experience with trials, these are things that they're going to be looking at closely. Because as I already mentioned before, the prosecutor is really going to be looking for people who, in my experience, are either anti-gun or at a minimum, they're not pro-gun. They're looking for people who are going to be malleable in that jury, people who don't know all that much. And in my view, of course, that opens us up to all those BS arguments that we kind of touched on before. That's who the prosecutor's going to be looking for. On the defense side, who goes second, you're obviously looking for folks who have an understanding of the fact of why do people carry firearms? Why is it going to be important to defend yourself? The fact that you do have a right to self-defense. And depending upon the nature of your case, obviously if like a bad guy's trying to rob you in a parking lot, they pull out a knife or pull out a gun, that might be a very different voir dire as compared to some guy starts with disparity of force in their favor, just starts pummeling you. And we basically have a firearm versus an unarmed attacker case. You're obviously going to have to spend a lot of time voir diring on that, as we might say if you're the defense attorney, because a lot of folks, they're not going to have any ability to set aside their prejudice that, look, firearm versus somebody without any kind of weapon whatsoever, that's just, you can't do that. And even if they have a knife, a lot of people may not intrinsically understand that a knife is every bit as deadly as a firearm inside a reactionary gap distance, subject of another video we've done, by the way. So they may have biases saying, look, you can really only use a firearm against another firearm, or you can't be the person who shoots first or anything like that. So there's all sorts of different things that the defense may have to look at, or again, hey, do you think it's fair to only fire once, or can you fire twice in self-defense or something like that? There's all sorts of different issues that the defense attorney may have to voir dire on, even if you think your case is reasonably straightforward, that they're going to have to get into to explore for issues of bias. Now, I want to talk about this really quickly, which is the fact of, so these challenges for cause, the prosecution, because remember, they go first. So they're moving to deselect people. They're looking for people who, hey, they own guns, they understand that, the odds of something awful happening may be low, but they're never zero. They understand the sense as to what the laws are and the necessity for why many folks choose to carry firearms. That's someone who they're going to be trying to push out for bias and prejudice. But that person, by the way, who they find who maybe they don't own firearms, and maybe this could be a pretty good prosecution witness. Maybe they've served on 4 juries before and they always convict or something like that. I mean, who knows? There's any number of reasons here, all right? What the prosecutor, if they're smart, will try to do is they'll gently probe for areas of potential prejudice and bias with those jurors, with the people that they like. Because what they want to do is they want to rehab those people and say, well, look, it sounds like you might be, you bring some interesting viewpoints, or you bring some strong viewpoints in this particular issue, but is it safe to say, and they kind of say that in that particular voice, which is the, can you play this game with me here? Is it safe to say that, look, when the judge gives you the instructions of the law, you can set aside that and you can render a fair and impartial verdict based upon the law as well as the evidence. And that's how you rehab somebody from the defense attorney ever being able to get a crack at them, which doesn't mean that the defense attorney ought not try. It just means that the prosecutor's really built up that wall to protect maybe that 1 juror or that 2 jurors or that 5 jurors that they're really trying to get to. which again just goes back to the strength and the power of being first. So guys, I want to leave it largely there, but I also want to leave you with a few points. One is that we could be spending hours and days talking about all the different nuances of jury selection, the different techniques, all this other kind of stuff. If that's something you want to see more of, let me know in the comment section below. But I also want to leave you with this. I have a sign hanging in the lobby of my office. It says something to the effect of, when you walk into a courtroom, you are putting your fate in the hands of 12 people who weren't smart enough to get out of jury duty. It's meant to make people laugh, and it's meant to be an icebreaker when you come in. Trust me, I've had some very intelligent jurors on jury pools that I've seen over the years. But there's also a little bit of truth to that, which is the fact that a lot of people, particularly in the 2A world, they don't want to be on juries. For any number of reasons. Maybe they just don't want to be on some sort of radar. Maybe they have an important job that they can't miss or something like that. Or just, you know what, they just don't want to be involved for whatever reason whatsoever. I see that time and time again. What I don't see though is the same thing on the anti side. I see those people wanting to get onto juries. So please, guys, take your time. If you're ever able to get on a jury, of course, be open, be honest with what the parties are asking you. But guys, I would ask you to please just take a moment, be a good civil servant in that sense, discharge your civic duty, because you never know if it might be you next time. Also, on that same note, people who talk a lot, by the way, on juries during voir dire, those are the people who often have strong opinions and are more likely to get struck. Those who are more quiet are the ones who tend to get on. So if you are the person who you hear this video and you're like, jury service isn't for me, keep in mind, if you're going to be quiet, you're probably going to get on that pool. Guys, most of the people who watch my videos, something to the tune of 80% plus, actually are not subscribers. So it would be fantastic if you could take a moment, and thank you for watching this far. If you could just take a moment, pause, click subscribe in the video, show your support for the Second Amendment. Likewise, click like and to share my videos around. And guys, we'll see you in the next one. Guys, if you enjoyed this video, you might like some of the other content that we've been up to recently. Please feel free to check out these other videos. We'll see you in the next one.